All right, Steve Wood, recovered alcoholic. Welcome to the Great Reality Book Study. Let me move my chair up a little bit. And so, last few weeks we've been looking all over this beginning of the book, and the prologue they call it, with the table of contents and forwards and all that stuff. And last week we saw that showing others precisely how we recovered is the main purpose of this book. It precisely means exactly. So we're trying to show people exactly how we recovered. It's pinpointing it like down to the T. And many, talk about how a big book is most valuable to the person that you take through it. It's not necessarily it's valuable to you. It's nice to have, but it's valuable for you to know it so you can take people through it. The more you take people through it, the more you know it. And we talked about a little bit about traditions last week, about Bill meeting Bob, and the most powerful message there was Bob's big hookup, staying sober, was just not making amends. It was not making amends, and it scared me to think of it. So the last thing we read last week was it says, hence the two men set work almost frantically upon alcoholics arriving in the ward in Akron City Hospital. Their very first case, a desperate one, recovered immediately and became AA number 3. He never took another drink. So we're going to look at that, and we're going to go to A Vision for You and read about AA number 3. So excuse me. Anyone that knows me, I do things a little backwards. So I don't cover those chapters at the end. I refer to them a lot. And so we're on page 156. So this is AA number 3. Says, but life was not easy for the two friends, that's Bill and Bob. Plenty of difficulties presented themselves. Both saw that they must keep spiritually active. Very important what it says there. One day they called up the head nurse of a local hospital. They explained their need and inquired if she had a first class alcoholic prospect. And she says, yes, we've got a corker. It's an old school term right there for a drunk. He just beat up a couple nurses. Goes off his head completely while drinking. Hold on a second. Make Rob co-host. While drinking, but he's a grand chap when he's sober. Though he's been in here 8 times in the last 6 months, it's 8 detoxes. That's a lot. Understand he was once well-known lawyer in town, but now we got him strapped down tight. So when I say strapped down tight, and these rehabs, I mean, in the hospital wards, they didn't know how to detox you. And the guy, like you said, she beat up a couple of nurses. They would spit sometimes, and the best thing they could do would be to strap them down the bed where they could turn their neck, and they would put bedpans next to each head and come and clean them up later. And the man strapped down tight is Bill Dotson, and that's the man in the bed. I'm going to show you that picture. You guys seen this picture before? It looks nothing like him. That's the man in the bed, and I forget who drew the picture, but it was based off of Bill describing it. But neither of them look like Dr. Bob, and Bill Dotson does not look like that. But that's what was based off of, the man in the bed. So little side thing there. It says, here was a prospect, all right. By the description, none too promising. The use of spiritual principles in such cases was not so well understood as is now. The spiritual approach was totally unheard of. Totally unheard of. And the only treatment, well, I'm sorry, the only treatment that was, my computer's being weird real quick. Hold on. There it goes. A lot better. The only treatment was the asylum that wasn't treatment. So For these guys, the only treatment was the asylum. The spiritual approach was foreign, and this asylum, it was torture. They would dope these people up for years, and all the hospitals, all they knew was how to drive people out. They didn't know, and hope for the best. And hope for the best meant this: the person might get a couple of days dry, drink again, dries out, drinks again. That to people's was a success of sobriety for a real alcoholic. Think about that. Unheard of. It was unheard of for a person to get long term. So it's long term sobriety is deemed impossible, unheard of. It didn't exist, and people didn't believe it existed. The type of alcoholic this book is written for. So here comes these two guys saying we have a spiritual treatment for alcoholism. Can we talk to your patients? Now, even today, go into a treatment center and say I have I have spiritual principles I want to go over with your patients, or even the steps, and they kind of go, okay. People don't get it as much as there used to be a detox, and when I first got sober, I used to go in there quite a bit, and not when I wanted to drink did I go in there, as far as like I never felt like I wanted to drink, but I would go in there when my head wasn't on. He always says, go in there and talk to some new guys, get a couple sponsees. And every time I go in there, there's one guy look at the desk and I say, hey, I want to work with guys there. And he go, whatever, man. And so you say, let me in, but you say, whatever. It's the way it was. Still is. But one of our friends, back to the book, one of our friends said, put him in a private room, we'll be down. We'll be down. 2 days later, a future fellow of Alcoholics Anonymous stared glassily at the strangers beside his bed. Who are you, and why this private room? I was always in a ward before, said one of the visitors. Look at this. We're giving you the treatment for alcoholism. Here's a guy who's been in this hospital numerous times, just in the last 6 months alone, is known in the area as a drunk, and no one's offered him treatment other than dry out. So that was, no one heard of that before. Treatment for alcoholism? What's that? Hopeless was written large on the man's face. But but that's no use. Nothing could fix me. I'm a goner. The last 3 times I got drunk from here, on the way home from here, I'm afraid to go out the door. I can't understand it. We know he's a real alcoholic, definitely. And how many have been afraid to leave rehab? Because I remember being afraid to leave, when I go to the longer rehabs, like the 60s and the 90s, you would leave there and you go, man, you hear about people relapsing as soon as they leave. And yeah, so check this out. It says for an hour, the two friends told him about their drinking experiences. Over and over, he said, that's me, that's me. They weren't giving war stories. When they say relating their drinking experiences, they're speaking it from the allergy obsession aspect. Like, I put in my body, I drank, and I would go do this. And so he's to relaying their experiences to the allergy obsession, not drinking stories. I remember, that's me thing. The rehab I was talking about earlier, when I first started sponsoring there, I got a guy that done 17 years flat in prison. And first of all, I'm like, oh, wow, this is gonna be interesting. And then he was a heroin addict, and I didn't do heroin, but I mean, I tried it, and I knew I would eventually get screwed up by it. But I went to my sponsor and I go, what do I do? And he goes, sponsor him. And I took him through the steps. And he goes, well, what do I say? And he goes, doc, just read doctor's opinion. And when I kept reading doctor's opinion and not throwing anything in there, because I didn't want to say anything that would confuse him. And he's like, that's me, that's me, that's me. Universal. The man in the bed was told the acute poisoning from which he suffered, how it deteriorates the body of the alcoholic and warps his mind. There was much talk about the mental state preceding the first drink. So acute means serious, extremely serious. Poison, of course, is toxic, deadly, fatal. So acute poisoning describes the toxic effects a substance has on the human mind and body, right? They explained to him, the allergy, the obsession, the insanity of that first drink, then why your mind does that. They didn't need to go into war stories or tell him about God. They hammered him with the hardcore medical facts. Hardcore medical facts. Give me one second. My computer's being weird again. There it goes. The hardcore medical facts. When you describe to a alcoholic how alcohol deteriorates the body and warps the mind, it demands their attention because they've been there before. They understand it. It absolutely demands their attention and they're like, oh, wait a minute, I never heard this before. And when you demand their attention, they become open to a solution. Back to the book. It says, yes, that's me, said the sick man. The very image. You fellows know your stuff all right, but I don't see what good it will do. You fellows are somebody. I was once, but I'm nobody now. So he's got a little low self-esteem and self-pity going. From what you tell me, I know more than ever. I can't stop. At this, both of the visitors burst into laughter. Said the future anonymous. Damn little to laugh about that I can see. So they laugh because they knew they just got to him. They were joy, you know. He just took the first step, you know. And look up, it says the two friends spoke of their spiritual experiences and told him about the course of action they carried out, 4 through 12. They broke it down. Well, they didn't have 4 through 12 yet, but same idea. He interpreted, I used to be strong for the church, but that won't fix it. I prayed to God on hangover morning, sworn that I'd never touch another drop, but by 9 o'clock I'd be boiled as an owl. I mean, we've been there and that. We had to swore it off for good prayer. I can't do it anymore. I'm done for good. And 2 hours later, you're drunk again. Off and running. Normal people don't do that. They swear it off, and they'll probably swear it off for good. They just need a good reason. They don't have this allergy obsession we have. We swear it off. They swear off it works because they're it works for them. It doesn't work for us because our mind erases the pledge. The obsession erases the pledge. It's like it never existed. I remember remember Y2K, the big thing, and when the turn of the century, and there's all the computers are gonna get turned off and everything. And so I don't know what it was, but I was talking to this girl for hours in this back room. And there's like 50 people at the house I'm at. Everyone's having a good time, and I'm in there talking about the allergy obsession to her. And I wasn't even in recovery. That's how much I knew about. I wasn't sober at the time, but I've been dry for 2 days, and she's just like, I didn't want to sit sick in the back room. I've been to rehab 6 times by then. Never got more than a few months, never got past the 3rd step. And I'm like breaking down to this person at a party, the allergy obsession. And I go, and that's why I can never use again. And I walked out of that room after I explained to her, and on the table, there was a mountain of Coke, and my face just went right into it. I didn't even think that I didn't want to use it. It was like, woof. And she looked at me, and she goes, you're nuts. And I go, yep, that was it. That's just the way it was. I didn't know. I mean, I did, it would just overtake me. See what it says next. Is the next day found the prospect more receptive. He had been thinking it over. Maybe you're right, he said. God ought to be able to do anything. Then he added, he sure hasn't done much for me when I was trying to fight this booze racket alone. So there's that self-pity victim mindset thing going on again. We don't want to blame ourselves. So we blame anything else. In his case, he's blaming God. On the 3rd day, the lawyer gave his life to the care and direction of his creator, step 3, and said he was perfectly willing to do anything necessary, 4 through 9. If you think about, they explained to him, they got him there by explaining the medical facts. He was willing to do anything necessary then. So it says his wife came scarcely daring to the hospital, though she thought she saw something different about her husband already. He had begun to have a spiritual experience. And we'll get more into what the differences are, in a more thorough thing about spiritual experiences, a sudden overwhelming God consciousness, shift into God consciousness, leading to a change in character and wholeness, and awakening is a gradual shift in the God consciousness, leading to the new dimension, leading to change in character and wholeness. Says that afternoon, he put on the clothes and walked the hospital a free man. Look at that word. I mean, free man. A free man is someone that's no longer ruled or enslaved by something, to live freely without restraints and restrictions. So it's the ability to go anywhere you want to go, and we are set free from this mental obsession by doing these steps. This man left the hospital free man. The one thing I learned about recovery, not everybody likes a free person. Not everybody likes a free person, because there's those in the rooms who think they can do without the steps. So they still fight everything, including alcohol. And they, bark stuff out, and they believe it is impossible to be free from the thought of drinking. The insane mind, is, it says, there's they're insane minds. There's no way anyone can be free. That's why trying to beat this on our own is impossible. We need the steps. We need to empower ourselves set us free. He entered into a political campaign, making speeches in frequent men's gatherings of all sorts, often staying up all night. He lost the race by a narrow margin, but he found God, and finding God, he found himself. Does that mean when we find God, we find our true self? Yes. The self, the instincts that have been driving us our whole life, is the false self. The other self, which we ignore for so long, is the true self within us. He says that was June 1935. He never drank again. He too became a respectful, useful member of his community. He helped other men recover, and is a powerful in the church, which he was long absent. So you see, there were 3 alcoholics in that town. Now we felt we had to give to others, and what they found. I'm sorry, give to others what they found, or be sunk. After several failures, I think it was like 8 to find others, a 4th turned up. This is Ernie Galbraith, A number 4. He came through an acquaintance who had heard the good news. He proved to be a devil-may-care young fellow, sorry, whose parents could not make out whether he wanted to stop drinking or not. They were deeply religious people, much shocked by their son's refusal to do anything to do with the church. He suffered horribly from the sprees, but it seemed as if nothing could be done for him. He consented, however, to go to the hospital where he occupied the very room vacated by the lawyer. All this time, our friend in the hotel lobby incident, this Bill, remained in town in Akron. He was there for 3 months, 3 more months. He already been there a while. He now returned home, leaving behind his first acquaintance as Bob, the lawyer, and the devil-may-care chap. These men found something brand new in their life, though they knew they must help other alcoholics that they would remain sober. That motive became secondary. Look at this. It was transcended by the happiness they found in giving themselves for others. They shared their homes, their slender resources, and gladly devoted their spowers of fellow sufferers. Last week we came across the word avocation, which is something you do that's beyond work on your spare hours for pleasure, and what do you do with your spare hours, your free time? I mean, these guys gave their free time. Now take in mind for a second, this is 35-ish. When the book was written, it was like 37. The Free Labor Act, Free Labor Standards Act was passed in 1940, making the 40-hour work week law. But that didn't kick in until like 43. So these guys, it was not unheard of at all for people to be working between 60 and 80 hours, a week. Insane. And most of these guys, because of the depression, had 2 or 3 jobs. And what little extra time they had, they offered to other alcoholics, and even deeper, the developing of Alcoholics Anonymous. There was one guy, I can't remember his name, I think it was Phil Smith, said he probably got 4 hours of sleep for 3 hours a night sometimes. He would wake up, and some of the guys would be at work at 4 in the morning, and they would meet with the guy. It's crazy. That's what they did. Let's see what they did. They were willing by day or night to place a new man in the hospital and visit him afterwards. They grew in numbers. They experienced a few distressing failures, but in those cases, they made an effort to bring the man's family into the spiritual way of living, thus relieving much worry and suffering. A year and 6 months later, so, now we're looking at 37, pretty much, these 3 had succeeded with 7 more. Seeing much of each other, scarce an evening passed that someone's home did not shelter a little gathering of men and women happy in their release and constantly thinking how they can present their discovery to some newcomer. That was the original meetings. I mean, built around the newcomer or finding ways to get newcomers. This next one's kind of like our big book compendium mission statement. In addition to these casual get-togethers, it became customary to set apart one night a week for a meeting to be attended by anyone or everyone interested in a spiritual way of life. This is around 1930, 36, 37. Aside from fellowship and sociability, the prime object was to provide a time and place where new people might bring their problems. That type of meeting happened a lot in those days for anyone that wants this way of life. And these guys had big ideas that maybe the rest of the world might benefit from this. That's why the original 12 steps said having a spiritual experience as a result of this course of action, we carry this message to others, especially alcoholics. Practice principle in our affairs. The reason why that changed was because, if we're going to be Alcoholics Anonymous, we got to stick on alcoholics. They didn't want to have a branch of AA here. It was just, they just had to be stern on it. So we're going to go back to forward to the 2nd edition. We're going to go to XVI, or I think it's XVI. Am I a bit confused? Let me look at my book for a second and make sure I don't want to steer you guys the wrong direction like I've been doing my whole life. I think it's XVI. XVI. It says, where it says middle of the page, it says, middle of first paragraph, this work at Akron continued through the summer of 1935. There were many failures, but there was an occasional heartening success. When the broker returned to New York in the fall of 35, the first A group had actually been formed, though no one realized it at the time. That was the Drunk Squad in New York, Akron group. I mean, the Calvary Missions group in New York. A second small group promptly took shape in New York, to be followed in 1937 by a third group in Cleveland. Besides these, there were scattered alcoholics who picked up basic ideas in Akron and New York, who were carrying to form groups in other cities. One thing I read recently is when they started looking at AA, there was people that were brought to AA meetings, and people started their own groups, and they just were mimicking what they were doing in New York. And Bill only thought they had, a few meetings, and they had more. But by late 1937, the number of members having substantially sobriety was behind them was sufficient to convince the membership that a new light had entered into the dark world of alcoholism. So we're going to look at the first 40 members of Alcoholics Anonymous. So you see Bill number 1, top of the list, of course. And then you have hold on a second. Bill number 1, then you have Dr. Bob, then you have Bill Dotson. Dr. Bob sponsored him. Ernie Galbraith, Dr. Bob Akron. And then after that they had 5 failures after Galbraith. I don't know how many it was before they got to Galbraith between Bill Dotson and that, but there was quite a bit. Hank Parkhurst was Bill's first sponsee from New Jersey, or they call him New Jersey. Walter Bay, he was Akron. Phil Smith, Akron. Fritz Mayo, was in Maryland, but spent most of his time in New Jersey and the Oxford group. After Fritz, they had 11 failures in a row. And then they had Celeste Bent. And so they ended 35 with 9 members. And then you had 36, you had Harold Gressinger. After Harold, 14 in a row, 7 and 7 and 37. You can see all those guys there. I'm not going to read all their names. And then they had more, but 14 in a row. And you see of those 14 in a row, Akron, Cleveland, which is Akron, pretty much. Akron. There's only a few New York guys there. And Akron guys didn't want to be stigmatized by the Oxford, like being a part of the Oxford group necessarily. So they kind of, even though Akron had a reputation of being a bunch of Bible people and stuff, it's not necessarily true. I mean, a lot of them were Christians, but they didn't stick around. They wanted to succeed. But then 37, you had Alfred Smith, Bolden, Seal, Douglas Deloy, Robert Evans. He had 6 for 6, 4 failures in, and then you had all these other guys. I'm not going to read them all, but you see the failures are less and less. One failure. So here's the interesting thing is, after when these first 40 were put into play, what happened was they looked around the room at that Christmas party and they said, we're onto something here, and they came up with the idea after realizing they couldn't go on a speaking tour, let's write a book. And mid 37, they started writing a book. What's interesting is the book, was primarily written in New York, yet there was only, of the first 40, there's only 9 members from that area. And so some of the members were going from Akron, coming and staying in New York, and they would go to Akron to help write, but they had more people, because in 38 they had 50, by 38 they had 52, and 40 they had 600, after the book. But so they had enough, by the time the book came out, there was about 80, and then they just kind of blew open. I'm gonna close this down. So back to the book. It was now time for the struggling groups to place their message and unique experience before the world. The determination bore fruit in the spring of 1939 by the publication of this volume. The membership had been reached to about 100 men and women. The fledgling society, which had been nameless, now began being called Alcoholics Anonymous from the title of their own book. The flying blind period had ended, and AA entered a new phase of its pioneering time. So the big book, I said before, didn't take off right away. They sent 20,000 leaflets to medical doctors and got 2 replies. The 4,700 big books, which that was Hank's idea, which they realized years later was a big mistake because those 47 big books sat in the warehouse, barely moving at all. And then came good news. Um, they got some good reviews, and here's some of them. With the appearance of the new book, a great deal began. They had really bad reviews at first. Some people called it like religious extortion and all this stuff. And but Dr. Henry Emerson Fosdick, the noted clergyman, reviewed it with his approval. In the fall of 1939, Fulton Osler, then editor of Liberty, printed a piece in his magazine called Alcoholics and God. I would highly recommend to read that. This brought a rush of 800 frantic new inquiries into little New York office. So that's when it blew up in New York, really big, which meantime had been established. Each inquiry was painstakingly answered. Pamphlets and books were sent out. Businessmen traveling out of existence groups were referred to these prospective newcomers. New groups started up, and it was found, to the astonishment of everyone, that AA's message could be transmitted in the mail as well as word of mouth. In 1939, it was estimated 800 alcoholics were on their way to recovery. It was more like 800 in mid 40s, but I mean 1940. In the spring of 1940, John D. Rockefeller gave a dinner for many AA friends, to which he invited, we talked about that a little bit before, AA members to tell their stories. That's so they could get money. News of this got to the world wires. Inquiries poured into again, and many people went to the bookstores to get the book Alcoholics Anonymous. Here's something that's interesting. It was a huge success, the book, but a lot of people weren't even alcoholics got the book because you got to read this book. Think about it. By March 1941, the membership had shot to 2,000. Then Jack Alexander wrote a feature in the Saturday Evening Post. It's huge, and placed such a compelling picture of AA before the general public that alcoholics in the need of help really indulge us. By the close of 1941, AA numbers had reached 8,000. So the article brought in almost 7,000 in 6 months. 7,000. The mushrooming process was in full swing. AA had become a natural national institution. Another thing that helped with the growth of Alcoholics Anonymous in those days too, with the book's profits. And people want to say, "Oh, Dr. Bob and Bill made all this money," but they took a lot of their profits, and what they would do is they would pay for a man and his family to move to a city where there's no AA, and they would pay them to live there for anywhere between 6 months and a year or longer, so they could start new meetings, and then they would send them to the next city. And there's a nickname for it. I can't remember what it was called, but like if Richard was, he's in St. Louis, but say he's in New York, they send him to St. Louis, start a group, and then once it starts up, he takes off. There's a great story about the first day, how they did that with Ireland. Our society then entered a fearsome and exciting adolescent period. The test that it faced was this: could these large numbers of erstwhile radical alcoholics successfully meet and work together? Would there be squirrels over membership, leadership, and money? Would there be strivings for power and prestige? Would there be would there be striving for power and prestige? Would there be sacrifices which split AA up? Soon AA was beset by these problems, and on every side and in every group. But out of the frightening and first dispiriting experience, the conviction grew that AA had to hang on together or die separately. We had to unify our fellowship or pass off the scene. At these meetings, there were those who had, so the thing about it is, there were those who had, in those meetings, had lots of money. There were those who had lost all their money. There were those who never had anything. There were those with egos, big egos. There was disagreements in politics. So yeah, all the people coming in, people normally wouldn't mix. So they had some guidelines. And it says, as we discovered the principles by which the individual alcoholic could live, so we had to evolve the principles by which AA groups could, AA groups and AA could strive and function effectively. It was thought that no alcoholic man or woman could exclude from our society, that our leaders might serve but never govern, that our group, that each group was to be autonomous, and there would be no professional class of therapy. There was be no fees, no dues or expenses were to be met by voluntary contributions. There was to be least possible organization, even in our service centers. Our public relations were based upon attraction rather than promotion. It was decided that all members ought to be autonomous at the level of press, radio, and films, and that no circumstances could be given, should we give endorsements, make alliances, or enter public controversies. This was substance was AA's 12 traditions, which are stated in pages 561 of this book. Though none of these principles had the force to rule or laws, they became so widely accepted in 1950, they confirmed by the first international conference in Cleveland. Today, the remarkable unity of AA is one of the greatest assets our society has. Now we're gonna get to some deep stuff here. Give me a sentence to set up my screen. Oops, I don't want that. Give me 1 second. This plays tricks on me sometimes. There we go. Well, it's being weird. Anyways, let's go back to where it was. Give me 1 second. This thing's not being cooperative. Anyways, it'll make sense in a second. So while internal difficulties of our adolescent period were being ironed out, public acceptance of AA grew in leaps and bounds. For this, there were my computer's being weird tonight. There were 2 reasons: a large number of recoveries and reunited homes. Now, these made their impressions everywhere. Now, here it is. Of alcoholics who came to AA, this is 1955, and really tried, 50% got sober at once and remained that way. 25 sobered up after some relapses, and among the remainder, those who stayed on the AA showed improvement. Other thousands came to a few meetings and at first decided they didn't want the program, but great numbers of these, about 2 out of 3, began to return as time passed. So I'm going to share the screen here. So we're going to look at some recovery rates, and I wanted to share my screen so that would be next to it, so you could see where they were, but it's not cooperating if we go side by side. Unless I try this. Let me try this. No, that didn't work. So Silkworth, let's just look at Silkworth first. Dr. Silkworth, with no allergy obsession, I mean, with only allergy obsession concept, right, and suggestion of abstinence, had a 2% recovery rate with 40,000 alcoholics, 98% failure rate. But in 1935 to 1955, they're saying here, it's 75%, 25% failure rate. So in 1955, AA had 135,000 members, and they were claiming 75% recovery rate. You know, Clarence Snyder in Cleveland, Dr. Bob's protege, in 1945, so look at right here, claimed a 93% recovery rate, and some people claim 98 even in that area. Minnesota in 1948 led by the guy who wrote the Red Book, 83% recovery rate. And not everybody believed in keeping track, but they did. In 1960s, they figured it's about 80% recovery rate. So as you can see, the 40s and 50s and 60s, AA was not a program of action, but a fellowship of action with two AAs that mirrored each other, one book, one meetings. They had strong recovery, high recovery rates. And they boasted about these recovery rates because nothing like this had happened before. I mean, you look at the size of the groups, right? So 1970, something happened. Quality and recovery went downhill. Started really getting downhill. But look at why. It's getting bigger and bigger. So AA had an idea. In 1980 to 87, they did what was like a census report to members. Anyone who was around back then may have come across them. My friend, a couple of my friends I talked to mentioned, remember when they were passed out. When they came back, 5% recovery rate is what they came back with. Now, in the mid 90s, it was done again because they thought, oh, something must be wrong. They did a more sophisticated census report, and it came back less, 3%. Now, after that, they stopped. Let me see if it will let me do my side-by-side view on this. It might. Nope. It's being ridiculous. And the thing about it is, in 2000, alcohol treatment, I think it's called the Quality, said it was 10%. In 2002, someone else said one was 2%. AA pushed a new census report. I'm sorry, the AA didn't do a census report, but AA pushed a 2012 census report that came out by a third party claiming 25% recovery rate, but people call the report a guess. Addiction specialist that was done, I believe it was more like 2017, and they were going pretty deep on A when they said it was between 8 and 12. I know it, as you can see, membership had grown, right? But you go from 93% to 5% is real sad. So the question I want to mention is, what happened? So to do that, we need to go back to the beginning. Speaker meetings were always 1 hour. No discussion by members. 1 hour speakers, or sometimes 2.5-hour speakers. I'm going to read a passage from Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers. We did not need to tell our drinking histories at meetings back then. Frankly, we did not think it was necessary. Everything was business. Besides, we already knew how to drink. What we wanted to learn was how to stay sober and stay sober. So those speakers spoke how they established a relationship with God. It was very common for speakers to be centered on God. But something happened in 1956. The American Medical Association declared alcoholism an illness or disease, either one, I forget, I think it's an illness, I think what they call it, allowing hospitals to admit alcohol patients with the same priority as patients with other conditions. So Hazelden and Minnesota got this big idea. So they turned their halfway houses, called guest houses, into the first rehabs. The Minnesota model was born, which is basically what we see today. 28-day spin-dry inpatient program, right? Clinical, individualized treatment and counseling for alcohol and addiction with active, family involvement, 12-step work, and aftercare. So aftercare is going back to treatment center after rehab. And they sit in a circle and everyone checks in, brand new people. And the counselor runs, they still have those groups. I ran aftercare groups before, and I always get in trouble at the place I worked at because I was supposed to talk about the stuff. I'm supposed to let them talk. I talk about the steps. But so in 1964, so what happened was AA in early 60s started losing members as far as not as many newcomers coming in. And they're like, where's all the newcomers? We're not getting them. And then they found out that they were going into aftercare. Guys were coming in with 7 and 8 months of sobriety. And so they started looking at these aftercare groups, and probably the wrong people do the research, but in 1964, the Grapevine put out an article suggesting groups to try a new style of meetings called speaker discussion meetings, molded after aftercare groups. It was never tested or tried. It was just says, here's what you're going to do. In the Grapevine, they just started it. And it was the brainchild of AA World Service as a way to let all members speak in meetings, even newcomers. Basically, you put the microphone in the hands of newcomers who don't have anything to talk about. So members became more dependent on meetings than the steps. In the 70s, the courts started appointing people to come to as well. And by the 80s was never the same. The powerful message of the 40s and 60s was gone. It turned into group therapy, less program talk, low recovery rates. Now, those recovery rates I showed, are they true? I'm not going to argue against them. I've been around long enough to see it's a revolving door. I mean, go to a meeting, and then don't go for 6 months, and go back to the meeting, and count the people there that you recognize, and think of the people you don't see anymore. You won't recognize the group. I do know if one does the steps, they still have a 95 or 93% recovery rate. People ask me all the time, what's the what do you believe? I say 100%. I've never had anyone relapse that did the steps. And I say that at rehabs all the time. And some guy will stand up and go, I did the steps. And I go, really? And you're here again? And they go, yeah. And he goes, did you make your amends? Oh, not all of them. I made a few. Did you do your 10 step? And then the guy will say it too. Nope. I never sponsored. Well, he didn't do the steps. But the people that do this and honestly try, like it says, I'm going to quote my good friend Derek, who passed away. He told this great story. So my kneecaps get broken. So where do I go? I go to Broken Kneecaps Anonymous, right? And I go there, and all we talk about is our freaking broken kneecaps. And 6 months later, my kneecaps are still broken. Enough said. Let's go back to the book. There's another reason for wide acceptance of AA was the mistration of friends and family and medicine and religion, and the press together with innumerable others who became and are able, persistent advocates. Without such support, AA could have never made progress. Some of the recommendations of AA early medical and religious friends will be found further in this book. Alcoholics Anonymous is not a religious organization, neither does it take any particular medical point of view, though we cooperate widely with men of medicine as well with men of religion. Alcohol being no respecter of persons, we are an accurate cross-section of America. Now check this part out. This is 1955, and dissent lands, some demographic evening up processes is going on by persons' religious affiliations, which include Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Hindus, and a sprinkling of Muslims and Buddhists. More than 50% of us are women. Take this in. 1955, segregation is bad, right? Women's liberation hasn't happened yet, meaning women do not have equal rights and the same freedom as men, barefoot in the kitchen, right? We were coming out of 2 wars, World War II and Korean. So there's a divide amongst the people, especially Asians from those countries living in the United States. And there was a huge divide in politics. Catholics, Protestant, Jews, Hindus, Muslims, Buddhists did not mix in company. you know. US was a pot ready to explode that wouldn't explode until, 1960 to the 60s, civil rights movements and all that. Again, this is 1950, 1955. In the middle of that is Alcoholics Anonymous. Remember what it says in 17, where average Americans, all sorts of our country and many of its occupations are represented, as well as many political, economic, and social and religious backgrounds. We're people who normally would not mix. People mixed from all different backgrounds who normally be able to would not be able to be in the same room, united under Alcoholics Anonymous. People who could not talk to each other or allowed to be in the same rooms or the same bathrooms. Religious folks from different backgrounds would hold hands and pray. Remember, AA is the only place where you can hold hands with a Muslim and an atheist and do a Christian prayer. It's true. All kinds, joking aside, 17 also says, but there is just among us a fellowship, a friendliness, and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. So AA was big and knocking down the walls of segregation. Mixed races was unheard of in 40s and 50 and 55. I want to read something, and this is I forget the guy that wrote this, but I could probably tell the story, but this guy tells it better. So check this out. In April 1945, Ella B. Grant, a non-alcoholic, arranged for a meeting between Charlie G., a white man and a several member of AA, and Dr. Jim S., a black man, an alcoholic who was still drinking. Mrs. Grant had known Charlie when he was drinking, and he had told about how AA had helped him. Upon hearing his story, they arranged the two to meet. Out of that meeting was born the first Black AA group. The group survived with the help of white AA members Charlie G., Bill A., Mark G., and Chase H. of the old Central Group, DC's pioneer group of Alcoholics Anonymous. Dr. Jim S. said they came, the YA members, and stuck by us and told us how to hold meetings, and most important, sponsored us and showed us how to do 12-step work, and then invite us into their meetings in places where such types of mingling was absolutely forbidden. At those groups, we welcomed them with open arms. That's deep. That's deep. Back to the book. At the present, our membership is a pyramiding at a rate about 20% a year. So far upon the total problem of several million actual and potential alcoholics, we've made only a scratch. Only a scratch. It is all probability that we shall never be able to touch more than a fair fraction of the alcohol problem and all its ramifications. Upon therapy for alcoholic himself, we surely have no monopoly. Yet it is our hope that all those who have yet to found no answer may find one in the pages of this book and presently join us on the high road to new freedom. I get chills when I read that. Here's a movement growing fast, yet they've only scratched the alcohol problem, and they will only touch a fraction. I never forget, I was called by my cousin to go speak to a friend of his, and we did a wet call, and he goes, let's go to my other friend's house, and he's a 62 man was 62 years old. We brought the message. He had never heard of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now we sit back and go, how does someone not know about Alcoholics Anonymous? There's lots of people, never heard the 12 steps. It opened my eyes, and AA is a small fraction. Alcoholics, think how blessed we are to be part of this fraction, minority. That's why I get chills, because we're all miracles. Every second someone is dying. Someone just OD'd right now. Someone just OD'd on fentanyl. Someone just overdosed on alcohol. Someone just died. You know, but so many give up and watch alcoholics give up on other alcoholics. That drives me crazy. Why would a person give up on another alcoholic? They fire sponsees? Excuse my French, but why the fuck would you fire somebody? It's so sad. And you thank God the early guys didn't do that. There's nowhere in this book did the early members ever say they fired a person because they want to do something. Thank God they had a no failure attitude. That's why it exploded and created a revolution, and we are blessed we did. You know, and when you go to bed tonight, remember you're a miracle, but think how blessed you are. Think how blessed you are. Next week, we're going to enter into the journey and a little history of Silkworth and Doctor's opinion. And